Welcome back to iGen Politics, formerly known as Intergenerational Politics. This is a podcast that makes politics engaging and relevant for all generations. This is Victor Shi, a freshman at UCLA, the youngest elected delegate for Joe Biden, and also one of the co-hosts of this podcast.
And I'm Jill Wine-Banks, Victor's co-host and the author of The Watergate Girl. I'm also the former general counsel of the U.S. Army, where I served in the Pentagon, and I'm wearing a special pin today for Secretary Miller, and that is the highest award that a civilian can get from the Army. It's a little teeny thing. There's a big award with, the medal thing and everything, but that's hanging on my wall. I'm also wearing a West Point thing that I got for speaking at the 77 commencement address. So we are very happy to have you with us today. And Victor, why don't you give some introductory remarks?
Sure, yeah. So it's clear that January 6th was one of the darkest days of our democracy when former President Trump took his big lie about an election rife with fraud to its zenith by going to the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There, he told his audience to march to the Capitol and, quote, fight like hell to stop Congress from doing its constitutional duty to confirm the election results. That march delayed Congress from performing its constitutional duty and caused numerous injuries, multiple deaths, damage to the Capitol, and theft of property. Nearly 5 months later, our nation is still searching for answers with the FBI, Department of Justice, and state law enforcement working to hold those responsible for every aspect of the January 6th insurrection accountable, from those who planned and caused it to those who damaged the Capitol and committed violence and death. Senate Republicans have now blocked the establishment of a bipartisan, independent 9/11-style commission intended to explore the events that precipitated the January 6th insurrection and provide recommendations to prevent another one from occurring.
Joining us today is former Acting Secretary of Defense under President Trump, Christopher Miller. He was directly involved, of course, in the law enforcement response to the insurrectionists on January 6th. He had given us the opportunity to talk to him today about that day and the relationship between the former president's big lie and his words on the ellipse and the events that followed, including how law enforcement and the military responded to the events of the day. Christopher Miller served as former President Trump's acting Secretary of Defense from November 9th, 2020, when his predecessor, Mark Esper, was fired for standing up to Trump until January 20th, 2021, Inauguration Day, when President Biden became president. For that 3-month period, and for the months prior to that, he was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, a position he took after 27 years as a Green Beret commanding the 5th Special Forces Group in Iraq and Afghanistan and many other deployments. He has also been a civil servant and a defense contractor. Thank you very much for being with us today. And full disclosure for our audience, your sister and her husband, your brother-in-law, were my neighbors until just a few weeks ago when they moved back home to Iowa. And until then, we were friends. So I just wanted everyone to know that background.
Jill, it doesn't matter anymore because they moved. So there's no conflict of interest. I just want to be clear to go forward. They moved. So I never, ever was at their house looking over at your house when the lights would go on in your living room, indicating that you were doing a live shot for MSNBC. So no conflict of interest at all.
Victor and Guy did, but you didn't. It's true. So, Victor, why don't you ask the first question of Secretary Miller?
Sure. Yeah. So let's begin our conversation with the months leading up to the 2020 election and election night. You were the director of National Counterterrorism Center at the time, reporting to the director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. You heard President Trump attack the legitimacy of the elections. And I wonder, given your job at the time and the intel that you had, that surely countered his statements, how did you feel listening to then President Trump's words that night and before the election?
I need to correct the record. I was not the commander of the 5th Special Forces Group. I was a battalion commander. There are 3 battalions in the 5th Special Forces Group. I commanded one of the battalions in Iraq and overseas. So because anybody, if there's any Green Berets listening or special operators, they will be texting me saying I claim credit for something I did not know. What was your question again? So we're just going to go ahead and be like hyper political on this show because I'm a national security professional, and what I really was hoping that we talk about is about the military's role on January 6th. Now, if we want to go down the path of like asking all these questions, I got to tell you, folks. This is a really difficult time in America, and I'm sitting here alone and unafraid at my house, which will be undisclosed because I get regular threats against me every time I say something. Either 74 million or 81 million Americans are automatically going to be very upset with me. And then there's some very radical elements on both sides that go out of their way to harass my family and harass me. So this sounds like cliche, but I said this in my testimony recently when I was on the Hill. This isn't a joke. And, frankly, if we're going to go down that road, I'll tell you, what did I think? Hey, you know what? Politics is politics. My purpose and my calling is to defend the American people. Now, you can go ahead and give me some talk. Well, don't you think that domestic affairs matter about overseas relations? Okay, we can keep talking about that. So your question was, what did I think about the political nonsense that occurs in this country right now that's a threat to America? I probably feel very much the same way as a lot of Americans that are very concerned about the future of our country, but yet very optimistic because it shows like this that we're going to have an honest conversation, and hopefully we're actually going to share our ideas in a nonpartisan way so that we can fix these doggone problems in America. And I want to curse, but I'm not going to on your show because I want you to keep at least a PG rating. But so if we want to talk about that, keep asking, Victor, and I'll just keep harking on the fact that that's not my role. That wasn't my role in the administration. My role was to support and uphold the Constitution of the United States, as well as protecting America from all enemies, domestic and foreign. I mean, if you guys are just going to go down this bullshit, I'm telling you, I'm not going to. My family's at risk right now, and if you're going to go down there and just going to try to make these goddamn headlines, I'm not going to do this. So I did this as. I went up there on the Hill without subpoena, hoping that we would have an honest discourse about this stuff. But if you're just going to go down this road, I'd really have nothing to add because I'm trying to help fix problems. I thought that's what we were going to try to do. I thought we were going to do third way forward. I thought we were going to think about how do we solve these problems. And that's why I thought this show was really cool, was it's an intergenerational show. Jill, you saw the craziness of Watergate. You saw the craziness coming out of Vietnam. You saw the church hearings. You saw the Pike Commission. And now, Victor, you're living this thing. And, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then we start off with this. I'm like, I got to tell you, I'm really not interested. And so if we want to do that, let's just kind of kill it now because it's going to be too controversial and it's just going to be really heinous for my family. So I'm really not interested in doing
First of all, let me assure you, we do not want to do anything that's going to endanger you or your family. And what we do want to get is what are the facts? Give you a chance to explain yourself. You have been criticized for a number of things.
I could care less about being criticized.
Like you say
bullshit. I went up there on the Hill and just get my ass handed to me. Nobody gives a crap about it. The Senate did a really good job in their side. Nah, you guys started with this. You guys started with this provocative bullshit. But if that's what you want to do, let's keep going, and I'll calm down because I know how to do this, and I'll just give you some sound bites, and we won't advance our joint. I thought we had a joint cause on this to try to do something positive.
Well, we definitely want to do something positive, but I don't think it's unfair to say you had more information than I had, more information than Victor had, more information than. You were in an area with intelligence, so it just...
I didn't handle election intelligence. I handled counterterrorism intelligence. I didn't deal with election crap.
So tell me what intelligence includes.
Now, counterterrorism is a separate, distinct field of the intelligence. It's not counterintelligence, and it's certainly not the I didn't deal with foreign intelligence regarding election manipulation, which frankly is already out there. I don't think there's anything else to be said about that. But.
So, well, counterterrorism would include domestic terrorism threats.
Sure.
So, to me, this looks like a domestic terrorism event where you had American citizens who were trying to stop the certification of an election by what turned out to be violence. And I'm just, I know you can't reveal.
Yeah, that's domestic terrorism was in the portfolio when I was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And when I was the senior director, special assistant to the president for counterterrorism at the National Security Council, we wrote the counterterrorism strategy for the United States. For the first time in the history of the counterterrorism strategy, we recognized that domestic terrorism was an increasing threat and needed to be addressed, as opposed to in the past, we simply talked about Islamist terrorism. We're like, no, terrorism is terrorism. We have to talk about all of this. Now, sometimes that's forgotten in the current narrative that we were complicit in this, but we recognize that. But when you want to talk about collection of intelligence against domestic terrorism, that's the role of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And it's a very complex issue, as you know, from your time in the legal field. So, I mean, we tracked it, we followed it, and recognized that it was an increasing threat.
Well, you've raised an interesting point that maybe would be worth our audience hearing, which is the difference between the FBI's role in domestic terrorism and what your role was. And if I remember correctly, in that role, you designated certain things as threats, and that included domestic terrorism as a threat. So can you answer both those things? First of all, am I correct in your designation of domestic terrorism as a threat to America?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Terrorism's terrorism, period. Doesn't matter if it's domestic or foreign.
And can you elaborate more on the difference between the FBI and your role in the military?
Oh, yeah. The military doesn't collect domestic law enforcement. That's domestic intelligence. We did that. As you recall, we did that in the 60s and 70s, and it was a wholesale violation of American civil liberties of enormous proportions. We had the church hearings. We had the Pike Commission, which absolutely imploded due to the so I wasn't surprised with the charades that were up there in the House, because it was like very past its prologue. Pike Commission completely collapsed when they were studying the at that time it was leftist terrorist activity, and so there was absolutely no way in the Department of Defense, and as long as I was there, we were not going to conduct intelligence activities against American citizens, because it's absolutely unconstitutional, and every American should be horrified if their military ever did such a thing again.
Exactly, and there is the posse comitatus law, but I actually misspoke, because I meant to say when you were working for the DNI.
We tracked domestic terrorism. The FBI had active operations and intelligence collection against those that were people that were involved in domestic terrorism. That
was your role right before coming to the Pentagon as the acting secretary?
As one of many roles. There's active Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Well, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are related, and other plots worldwide. So we tracked all terrorism activity worldwide.
So, and did you work in conjunction with the FBI? Or
sure, yeah.
Okay, so
FBI's integrated into the National Counterterrorism Center. That was one of the lessons that was learned from the September 11th, 2001 Commission, was that we needed to break down the wall. So in your intelligence shop, you have FBI officers threaded throughout the organization to avoid that kind of brick wall.
Okay, so let's go forward to when you get appointed to be the acting secretary. Had you met the president before that day?
Sure. Yeah, we killed Baghdadi. I was the head of counterterrorism at the National Security Council, and Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the head of ISIS and had slaughtered thousands of people personally and been involved in just some heinous acts towards Americans. That was the time I met the president that night when the operation went in to kill Baghdadi.
Excellent. And so how did you find out that you were going to be nominated as the acting secretary?
You're not technically nominated. You get a call and you're told to report to the White House.
And when did that happen?
That morning of when Secretary Esper left.
And what was your conversation with him at that time?
With who? The president?
President, when you went to the White House.
The president said, I'm going in a different direction and removing Mark Esper, and I need you to go over and run the Pentagon. And, that's kind of, the West Wing show. You serve at the, pleasure of the president. And I'd accepted a political position. I'd spent a career as a civil servant. I'd spent 27 years as a infantry and special forces officer in the Army, and then retired in 2014 and continued to serve as a contractor and as a civil servant, and elected to accept the political appointment. And I can't remember what year it was, 2019, very focused on Al-Qaeda, very focused. This war started in 2001. I was there for the start of the war. Frankly, I'd been involved prior to that against bin Laden and had the opportunity to serve at different positions to continue to try to defeat Al-Qaeda. So when the president called and said I was, you don't get offered the position so much, it's like, hey, there are only a handful of us that were eligible to take the position based on the fact that we were presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. And I was one of those people and was asked to serve in that capacity for the rest of the Trump administration. Still,
I can only imagine how, in a way, exciting and terrifying it is to get a call to come to the White House for that.
Been in much worse situations. I mean, nobody's trying to kill. Well, people are trying to kill you now, but then it was like I've had people try to kill me. So it's like, this is DC. This is DC rules. This is bureaucratic, petty ass knife fight, and I can handle that all day long. I'm, at the end of the day, it's about America, and it's about trying to improve things and protect Americans. So I wasn't worried about that.
And did you have any conversation with him about what your policies or?
Sure. Yeah. I was like, I completely support President Trump's foreign policy goals of getting us out of these forever wars and getting us to a place where we're not in a state of perpetual war that's been occurred since 1940? Well, technically 1941. We've been in this perpetual state of war, and I think that's very unhealthy and inappropriate for America. With the end of the Cold War, we had other, absolutely needed to defeat Al-Qaeda, but I fully supported getting out of Afghanistan, getting out of Iraq, getting out of Somalia, and coming home. I'm very strong at this point. I'm a neo-isolationist. I could change tomorrow. The world situation might change. But at this particular point, I think it's best for America that we come home, we retool America, we get our act together and see how things happen overseas. It's a state of transition right now. And let's go ahead and just kind of like hedge a little bit. Let's let things play out a bit and not overcommit. And, let's think about things a little more deliberately than just this knee-jerk reaction that our foreign policy elite have been doing for way too long.
And did you have any second thoughts, or I don't know if that's the right description, but any pause given the firing of your predecessor? Did that make you think twice before accepting the position?
If you take the King shilling, I mean, it's kind of the thing in the way I was raised is selfless service. When you're called to serve, you don't get to choose. It'd be really nice if you're a sunshine patriot and you're like, oh, hey man, that's a little rough right now. It's a really bad time for me. I think I'm just going to hang out at home. I had a great gig. I absolutely loved being the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. We were doing such innovative things. We were just doing such exciting things. The workforce was miraculous. Young workforce, talented, hungry, innovative. I was so thrilled to be there. But you know what? When you take a job as a political appointee, when you get the call to move, It's kind of how it is. It's kind of like being at a major corporation. If they tell you like, hey, guess what? It's time for you to go take a tour in, sub-Saharan Africa. You're kind of like, okay, I mean, I've been collecting a paycheck from you for 20 years. I think that's how it works. So, like, oh, I knew it was going to be easy. Come on. I mean, I've got a little common sense. I'm from Iowa. I can't believe you're having me on. You guys from Illinois and all. I figured, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to work out in your show because I'm from across the border. But of course, everybody from Chicago goes to the University of Iowa. So I feel like I'm basically a second citizen of Chicago. But yeah, I mean, goes without saying, it was not going to be an easy just ride out the clock. And there are actually a lot of things we're trying to do, like get the hell out of these wars. And then, believe it or not, we really passionate about giving voice to members of the armed services, veterans and their families that haven't been heard. And, that's my passion. And to be able to do that and then continue against Al Qaeda, it was like, okay, hey, new job, let's go. That's the way the military works. Every year or 2 years, you change jobs. You don't get the check. It was just like, okay, whatever, new job, let's go.
So it sounds like you were really focusing on foreign affairs.
Yeah, it's the role of the Department of Defense.
So you must have been surprised when you ended up having a lot of your time spent on what became domestic terrorism and the January 6th events. Was that?
Not surprised at all. If any foreign policy professional or national security professional knows the thing that you prepare for is not the thing that you're actually going to do. It's like, that's how the business works. You show up to work and you had this great plan for the day, and then someone does something overseas or domestically, and you're like, okay, I guess that's the priority for the day. So no, I wasn't bothered. I mean, very well attuned to domestic terrorism, extremely attuned to the role of the military in domestic affairs. And so now it's just like, yeah, it's what we do. Got it.
And did you ever have a chance to talk to the president about the domestic side?
About domestic, I mean, what do you mean?
You took over right on the heels of the election. So was there ever any discussion about the election?
No. I mean, I was a national security person. The political side, they have separate meetings. I don't go to those meetings. We had some serious international threats that were of great concern, and to me and to the president. So no, domestic stuff is not something we talked about. You've seen it in the public record. Spoke with the president. I can't remember what day it was before the 6th, and he asked about our posture for January 6th. But no, it's not. We didn't talk domestic political stuff. That's not appropriate, nor the role of the Secretary of Defense.
So what was that conversation that you're referring to?
Had a very serious foreign threat that we had a long meeting on prior, and on the way out for 30 seconds, asked what's it look like for tomorrow. I think it was tomorrow. I don't have my notes in front of me. And I just said, hey, got a request from DC Mayor Bowser for National Guard support, which we're going to provide. He goes, okay.
So in the day or days, at some point in the, we don't know the exact date, but prior to January 6th, you were planning on providing the support through the National Guard.
Yeah. Mayor Bowser requested it. And there's some weird stuff in DC because it's not a state, which has come up again and again in these discussions. Not my problem. If you want to do a constitutional amendment or some sort of legislation change, I care less. I mean, not my problem. But currently, and at that time, obviously, request for National Guard support had to be approved by the president. He had delegated that authority to me, so I approved the mayor's request as she wanted. She had very strict stipulations about the use of the National Guard and size and force, and we looked at it very carefully. That's what the Department of Defense, there's one thing that they do well, it's plan and look at things and analyze things, and analyzed it and gave her full support.
So I know Victor wanted to ask about the letter that I'm sure you must have seen that was published in the Washington Post.
Which one? I can't keep up. I mean, literally, that's why I think it's Which one you got? You got the one where the people say that I was trying to establish neuter the National Guard so they couldn't be effective. Is that the one you're talking about the 5 restrictions that I placed on them?
Well, I was actually referring to the letter that the 10 living secretaries of defense.
Oh, that one. Oh, geez. What was up with that? What was on their mind? They didn't call me on that one, obviously.
So, but
you tell me.
Well, Victor, do you want to ask some questions about that?
Yeah, so I guess referring to that letter, I mean, did you read that letter at the time, or did you have any reaction to that letter?
Of course. I mean, it's pretty significant. You wake up, you get up way too early. It's still dark out. And you're like, man, I got to go in there and do it again today. But, that's your job, right? I mean, my parents raised me, do your job, just do your job. Bill Belichick, right? Just do your job. So you might not want to go in there, but you go in there because we're from the Midwest, right? The 3 of us are the same way. Like, you show up. And so what do? The first thing, I'd walk out and I got all this security detail around my house, which is driving my family crazy. And, I pick up my paper, the Washington Post, and I walk in there and I open it up and I'm like, oh man, you've got to be kidding me. This is just not what we needed. And I have no idea why they did that. Why don't you ask them? They don't call me, and I have not called them. And you're like, wow, y'all took counsel of your fears. You know better than that. I mean, come on, let's bring the temperature down a little bit. We do not need former secretaries of defense, taking counsel of their fears and playing into this doggone media political entertainment complex. I was absolutely horrified, still am, never going to get over that. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I have no idea, but I'm sure they have a very good reason for this. Oh, we were just concerned. Come on, you sat in that chair. Maybe they haven't sat in that chair in those circumstances, I argue, but they've been that chair when you're making life and death decisions, and you don't need a lot of people popping off giving you unwanted guidance. They could have called me and brought that up, but they decided that they would go. Who wrote that? I heard somewhere that someone else wrote it. Have you guys figured out who wrote that? I've been hearing a lot of rumors. I don't care. I'm over it.
Well, what rumors did you hear? I haven't heard anything.
I think I've heard that Cheney, I think, directed her father to gather maybe, I think, all the living defense secretaries, but I think that was the only thing I read about pretend.
Whatever.
So I guess going forward in time to maybe the January 6th rally in terms of President Trump and what he was going to say, did you have any idea of what was going to happen on the January 6th rally?
National security. Don't do domestic politics. Not a clue.
Can I ask one more question, listening to your answer on the other about the secretaries? I mean, I feel your
disdain. Disdain is a good word.
I'll accept your word, but did it actually end up influencing you in any way in responding on January 6th?
Absolutely not.
Because they were saying, don't allow the military to be involved. And I'm just wondering, because
Jill, I get so upset because, they led. It sounds cliche and trite, but for the heaven's sakes, our service men and women, you're supposed to call them service members now. So my kids will get angry with me for saying service men and women. And I apologize for that. Our service members, they, from the day that they enlist, it's inculcated in there. It starts with their oath of allegiance to the Constitution. And, there are so many people that wanted me to go public and to remind our service members of their loyalty to the Constitution. And I never did that. And I'll tell you why I didn't do that. Because I was raised to trust your subordinates. I was raised to trust your people. And for me to go public and go, hey, I just want to remind everybody to follow their oath to the Constitution, to me would have been the height of hypocrisy for me as a leader and I'm not a commander anymore, but as a leader and a manager of the Department of Defense, I would have never have done that, because that is disrespectful to those people that are serving our country. And I would never do that. And that's why I was so offended by those people. Like, you led them, and then you call into question their loyalty. What kind of leader are you right now? And so that's why I just fundamentally am so disappointed in that letter and how people have responded to this idea. There was, Jill, Victor, people thought the armed forces were going to conduct a coup and overthrow the country. What kind of nonsense is that? That would never happen. That's not going to happen. Now, that's not the way we raise our military. And I'm telling you, what the heck? 7% of our population are veterans, 1% currently serve. We have got to bridge that divide. The thought that the American public considered that their armed forces would do something counter-constitutional is horrifying to me. And that's why I'm on your show right now. That's why I agreed to do this, because I want to help educate people to the goodness and the dangers of their armed forces. The most important decision this country makes is going to war. And you know how, the decision making, the last war we just did that we just lost was atrocious. And I refuse. My obligation to the next generation is not to do that again. And this is not some lost generation thing. I'm not claiming that. But I came home from Iraq in 2003, July 1st, and my family was gone. And I just sat and I was so disappointed in our elected officials that we conducted an unjust war. And I was involved in that. I said, I'll be darned if I'm ever going to do that again. So that's why I don't care about all the Miller's insane. I don't care about that, because that's not what it's about. But, there's got to be a narrative. Yeah, everybody has to create their narrative to,
Well,
sleep at night.
having had the privilege of serving in the Pentagon and getting to know
You did it.
a lot of generals and service members, back then it was still servicemen and women, but I came to respect the leadership and the intelligence and the planning. But you said something that I have to then ask a follow-up about, because when you say about a coup, you do have Michael Flynn, a retired general, who clearly said, he's now trying to back away a little, but he said, I encourage a Myanmar-style coup for America. And so that's a little inconsistent with what, I agree that is the training. People are trained to obey only a lawful order and to obey orders, but to have loyalty and fealty to the Constitution. And then you have him saying that. So, it makes me want to ask you, what's your reaction to something like that from General Flynn?
Mike Flynn is a retired military officer. I won't speak for him. I think you bring up an extremely important point, Jill, and that's the role of retired senior officers in the political sphere. I'll give you an idea. I'm going to get a lot of hate mail from this one. It's not appropriate. If a retired military officer wants to enter the political arena, senior military officer, have at it. Give up your pension, give up your retired pay, give up your disability, and give up your rank, and have at it. This is America. God bless you. You've decided to do this. So I think we really need to think about civil-military relations, which is kind of the crux, I think, of your question. And that's just not appropriate, to answer your question.
I'm getting a lot of tweets, many tweets saying, why is he not being charged criminally? Why is he still getting a pension? And could he be court-martialed? And I did a little quick research, and it does look like court-martial is possible for retired officers in limited circumstances, and it looks like that's the only way that he could lose his pension, have it taken away from him. Do you know anything more about that you could enlighten us with?
Jill, you were general counsel of the Army, which you've forgotten more about this than I'll ever know. And thanks for doing the research on that. That's very helpful. I was just thinking going forward, because I think we have to have a further discussion as a nation about the role of military officers in the political space. So that's why I was just throwing out my idea. I hadn't thought about court martial. I'm sure that's on the books, but way above my knowledge base right now. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, that's not appropriate.
I mean, we've had, General Eisenhower entered politics. Many former retired generals have been active, Colin Powell, and have served admirably in both capacities. It's just this one episode with Michael Flynn seems to stand out in stark.
Sure does. Yeah, and that you used to win a war, you kind of the quid pro quos, you became president. That's how it worked. We haven't won a war for a while, so maybe it's a moot point.
So I'm sorry, but I interrupted your questions, Victor. I apologize.
No, I'm just wondering, because you express your disdain for that Washington Post letter. I'm wondering if any of those 10 defense secretaries ever reached out for you and offered guidance during that time, or any advice about how to deal with the events of the last months of the administration.
No.
Okay. And
Victor, you have to understand the way DC works is, I was a retired colonel. I was kind of a little unworthy and, get painted with the brush as some sort of Trump loyalist. You read all that, and people have heard that. So, people from Iowa City, Iowa aren't supposed to end up in the E-ring in the Secretary of Defense's office, quite simply. And, non-traditionalist. And that's another problem we have, folks, is, this idea that you have to have some superpower to understand the military and national security. Jill, you went in there and you experienced it, and kind of this kind of idea like, oh, you haven't served, therefore you're unworthy of giving us advice. That's nonsense. And the system's designed that way. It's a self-protective system to make sure that, and most professions do that. Let's be perfectly clear. So I'm just not bad-mouthing national security professionals. We see that across the board. You guys see it in your field. Like, oh my gosh, you started out in a podcast and now you're at NBC. I don't know about that. Geez, you didn't really I don't know about this Victor guy. So that's why I didn't expect that I would have any of them reach out, because, I'm kind of the unwashed masses, and they're like, oh, he's not worthy of our time. That's kind of my feeling.
And what were your goals?
And I'm not bitter at all. I care less, man. I'm just a student of the system. I don't care. I was the guy in the chair, and feel very, very comfortable and very confident in the things that we did there. So I'm not, believe me, this is not something I lose any sleep over. I care less. I mean, really.
And what were your goals during those final months of the administration? I know I read some reports about Jonathan Swan kind of going over your 3 goals. Did you have any goals during those final months?
Now, I love the fact that they take my 3 goals, which were kind of true. Like, hey, there are only 3. The bar is really low. Is that what you're talking about? I kind of said it in cheekishly, but it was kind of true. Like, the bar was really, really low. Like, hey, no military coup. Number 2 is no major foreign war. And number 3, let's not have American troops in the street beating up American citizens. And that was the bar. It was really low. We actually had really important things that we did and wanted to do. And one obviously was, I think, one thing we did was recognize that our veterans that had served at Karshi-Khanabad in Uzbekistan had been poisoned by toxic chemicals there, needed redress. So, you're kind of like, I finally got in this job, and I was always the subordinate that was looking up going, man, I can't believe they're not taking any of this seriously. They're all part of the problem. And then now you're the person, right? And I thought it would be the height of just absolutely cowardice of me if I got there and all of a sudden I started talking this way and, started talking about the big picture. You have to understand the big picture. No, at the end of the day, your workforce is your treasure. So to help out and get that remediated was critical. Gold Star families, those that have lost loved ones in the war, have, it's a it's the worst thing that ever happens in their life. And I always felt that we could do better in the Department of Defense. So that was another thing we took on. Another thing, so just FYI, so as we see the budget decline from $740 billion a year to $715 billion a year in the Department of Defense, you mark my words, I ask you all to pay attention to what they do with family support and what they do with our wounded warrior programs. Because what they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, the war's over. We don't need to spend so much on those now. Well, actually, now's the time we need to spend more money. And we, maybe we need to back off a little on their silly high-tech nonsense that, some defense contractor is shilling on them. So that was the other thing we really wanted to do. I felt like we're not organized correctly for our great power competition against China. And so we tried to do some things with special operations. And what we wanted to do was knit together all these fields that currently are orphans in the Pentagon: cyber, space, information operations, special operations, security. Right now, they're all just kind of like orphans and they don't have a sponsor. And I'm like, this is the future of America and our strength: artificial intelligence, machine learning, new manufacturing technologies. Let's bring that together as opposed to being dispersed. Let's bring that together and let's give it the attention it needs, and let's give them some love, because they're going to be critical going forward. And it's not going to be the F-35 and these great planes and all this stuff. Important, I got that, but that's not going to be the critical enabler that's going to help our nation, protect our nation. So that was the other thing. And then 71,000 Americans, 78,000 this year, 71,000 Americans last year were killed by illicit drugs. Jill, I don't know if you had to deal with this when you were general counsel, but we're like, the military was like, that's not a military mission. Protecting the border, and I'm not talking against illegal immigration. I'm talking against illicit narcotics coming up from the South or coming in from the West. It's like, hey, we need to focus on near peer competitors. We're like, well, actually 71,000 Americans are being killed every year. It is kind of important to our national security that we do what we can to, interdict. It's not a DoD-led mission, but, we have capabilities that we should apply and help law enforcement and help the counter narcotics people. So that was another thing that was really, really important that we wanted to kind of get settled out.
Well, you had a big agenda for what was only a short time. So
got assets to South and Central America, reinvigorated Gold Star families, worked with the Veterans Administration to recognize those that had served and have been exposed to toxic chemicals. And wow. And then just tried to help give voice to those poor people that are down there, screaming that something needs to be fixed that no one pays attention to, and try to help them out. I mean, so
good goal. But we got off the subject of January 6th, and it's of such fascination to me particularly. On the 6th, did you watch the rally live, or were you just getting reports?
No, it's working. It's working. Everybody asked that. You weren't watching the president's speech. It's like kind of busy, kind of concerned about some international stuff. And, no offense to anybody, I just didn't have 90 minutes to sit there and watch a political speech. There were people that are watching that would come in regularly and go, okay, this is what's going on. But no, I mean, I was like, you don't want your Secretary of Defense like watching TV, for 90 minutes or however long it was. I was, really, really concerned about other things going on.
So, throughout the podcast, you've talked a lot about just, your respect for the institution, your goals to progress the institution as well and enact these reforms. But, I guess it's so you were thrust into this position of dealing with this January 6th insurrection, and I'm wondering if you had any anticipation of what would happen on January 6th, knowing that Trump had spent months creating this false narrative about the election, now known as the big lie.
Yeah, I mean, didn't take Nostradamus to. Can you guys hear me? Didn't take Nostradamus to recognize that there was going to be there was a potential. And you saw it in June with the protests there, and then the demonstrations. You saw there were incidents, in December, January. It's pretty clear that there was a potential for wide-scale violence. Yeah, totally was locked in on that. Yeah.
And so I guess,
But so again, though, going back to the day how did you get the information of what was happening that day?
Yeah, I mean, there are 25,000, as you recall, Jill, there are 25,000 people in the Pentagon that staff the Secretary of Defense. There are a lot of people that are paying attention. People would come in and go, all right, this is what's going on. I was with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, was once we recognized that things were getting out of control. We were all there, and we had people reporting in, and then kind of typical crisis action type thing.
So can you describe that more? I mean, I know what you're talking about, but our audience won't necessarily know that.
Yeah, thanks. Really good point. I appreciate you doing that because, like I said, like this part of, I'm glad that we had this opportunity to educate. So in the Pentagon, you have these operation centers where they get, there are a whole bunch of people in there that are tracking everything that's going on in the world, not just domestically. And so they're reporting in. Each service has one, and then Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines are not a separate service. Space Force probably is a separate service now. They probably have an operations center too. So they're tracking things. But in this case, the primary organization was the Army. Had primacy on tracking things because of the Army National Guard from the District of Columbia was involved, and the Army and the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff, the head Army officer, were in the chain of command. So they're tracking this very carefully, and they would come in and give updates on what's going on. And then, we talked prior about the things that were important. And of course, the big one was wide-scale violence that was beyond the control of the police to handle.
And so looking at that, when you mentioned a few days before that, you had issued, I think on the 4th, a memo about how the National Guard could respond, and you had the role for security and for the release of the Guard. So I'm talking about your memo where you said, it requires my direct approval before you can use certain equipment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, pretty standard procedures for the military. Absolutely nothing nefarious about it. Learned some lessons from when the protests involving the murder of George Floyd. So the Army, as you know, Jill, is a learning organization, and it's like, well, let's make new mistakes this time. Let's not make the same ones. And very, very appropriate for our Army and our leadership to be that kind of introspective. So we recognize that there were certain things, but a lot of those things are several of those items on that list are very pro forma, that go out for every order involving use of National Guard I should say military forces in domestic affairs. So yeah, that was kind of, everybody looks at that as some sort of horrifying plot, and it's the essence of military planning, that the senior person provides additional guidance. And the purpose of that, of course, is you want to make sure all the way down to the person on the street, they know the purpose of their mission that day. And this wasn't initially a fighting mission, it was a protective mission. So the way you give them guidance about the use of riot control agents, tear gas, the equipment that they wear, their use of weapons, that's pretty standard, because what that does then, it reinforces all the way from the Pentagon all the way down to the person on the street that has to execute your orders. Like, okay, this is what we're doing today. This is not fight day. This is protect day. So I appreciate you asking the question. I hope that I'm trying to educate people, because there's a whole narrative out there that this was some sort of, plot to undermine the effectiveness. And you have to remember, Mayor Bowser, who is the elected official that runs the District of Columbia, was very clear that she wanted a protect mission, not a fight mission, which, hey, I've supported Mayor Bowser on her efforts. So that's how that intent, they call it intent, is transmitted all the way down.
Right. And So let's look at as events evolved that day. They did get out of control. I don't imagine that you foresaw that it would get to the point where
No.
the Capitol would be breached and the Capitol Police overrun. And you're getting real-time reports from all the military that is paying attention to this while you're, and I know how beautiful and dramatic the office in the Pentagon is for the secretary. And then, you hear I'm sure you get a report that says the president has just told the crowd to march down Pennsylvania Avenue and to fight like hell at the Capitol. At that moment, did you start thinking, I may have to change that order, or I may have to not change it, I may have to give the permission that I said they had to get from me before they could use more serious equipment? And I'm just trying to ask you now, what were you thinking when you heard go to the Capitol and stop the steal, stop the certification, stop Congress from doing its constitutional duty? And you, as someone who took an oath to defend the Constitution, what was your reaction?
That everything that we had planned for and all of our meetings prior with local law enforcement and federal law enforcement the law enforcement was very clear. There were 8,000 to 10,000 cops in the street that day. And they said, we can handle demonstrations of up to 100,000 people. So at this point, I'm like, cops still have it. We have not even come close to crossing the threshold. And therefore, there is no role of the armed forces at this point.
Okay. So then let's go forward a little more. At 2:25 in the afternoon, which is 14 minutes after the Capitol had been breached, the insurrectionists had gotten in, they'd entered the building.
Do you know that for a fact? Is that when because I can't tell when they actually broke into, because I'm not trying to be dismissive. I still can't figure out. I looked at the New York Times. They had they've got a video log, and then I'll ask other people, like, when did they actually breach the Capitol? People still don't know. But I'm with you. I will totally agree with you about 2:25, 2:30 is when it's like it's gone.
Let's not look at the actual time. Let's put it in terms of an event, okay?
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point, Mike Pence was evacuated.
He wasn't evacuated. He stayed in the Capitol.
He was evacuated from the Senate chamber.
Right.
He was put into protective custody and eventually was evacuated.
Well, it's not protective custody, Jill. I think that's like a legal term, isn't it? But yes, I agree with you. He left the Senate chamber.
What do you want to?
He was moved to a safe location. Agree.
He was protected and moved to a safe location, taken out of the Senate chamber, which was in danger of being breached.
Mm-hmm.
So how soon? What was the coordination between your office and Secret Service, who was taking charge of protecting him? When did you learn that he was moved out of the Senate chamber and that he was in danger?
I don't remember. I probably learned from the news.
Okay, so we all learned. I mean, everyone watching saw it happen, basically.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, and then you saw the breach of the Capitol, whatever time that was. I'm kind of like 2:25, 2:30 is good enough. And yeah, so definitely at that I think where I knew that law enforcement had lost complete control was not so much. Well, yeah, I mean, and here's the other thing. Everybody's like, the terminology used is really pedantic, I know, but they talk about the Capitol was breached at, I don't know, 1:15. No, that's not a breach to me. That's when they came over the bike racks on the outer perimeter. Bad. But at that point, I'm still not thinking. I'm like, cops, they've got 3 more lines of defense. The cops got this. They said they have this. And but when the Capitol was physically breached and the woman was shot, at that point, it was like, okay, this is beyond the capability of local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. It's going to take a concerted Department of Defense response to assist, key thing, not take lead. You don't want your Army taken lead, that's martial law stuff. We weren't even close to that. So supporting local law enforcement, it was at that point where I was like, okay, this is a whole new situation. The situation's fundamentally changed. Our assumptions and the things that people had said earlier are no longer valid, and the Department of Defense. But I'll just be honest with you. At that point, I'm thinking like, okay, we got January 20th coming. And so here's how it works. I know that we have people that know how to do current operations, the immediate thing. We know how to do that. Like, okay, get moving. And that's why at 3:04 gave the word, get National Guard, mobilize the entire thing, support local law enforcement. But I'm already hopped ahead at that point, and I'm talking to Chief of the National Guard and others going, we now need to flood DC with National Guard troops to reestablish control on Capitol Hill and get ready for the inauguration.
Okay, and that's a good point that I will follow up on, but according to what I've read, it wasn't until 4:41, which was 3 hours after the police at the Capitol said, we're in trouble, we need assistance, that you actually...
I've been in plenty of gunfights in my life, and when you're in the middle of a horrible situation, you always are desperate for assistance, and I appreciate that. I'm extraordinarily empathetic and of those who were on the front lines that day, and I also have huge empathy for those that were in the chambers that day. And I know there's a lot of fear, and I literally understand that. But a 911 call does not equate to a meaningful request for support. And just like a 911 call, you have to ask, what's going on? Where are you? What's the situation? And oftentimes in these situations, you get tunnel vision, and it's natural. It's absolutely typical. It's a human response. And all you see is like your door, your little lane of what's happening. So that's why I get this like, oh, we asked for support at this time. I didn't receive those requests. And I find them very typical of how crisis happen and how people respond to them.
So let's look at what the time frame was when you actually approved sending troops to help.
3:04.
Okay, so what happened at 3:04, and why is it being reported that it wasn't until 4:41?
Politics, obviously, or it's either raw, bland, bold politics, or it's a misunderstanding of how the military works. I suspect it's a little bit of both. But that's the military, my classic line I use, this isn't Halo. Master Chief doesn't teleport. There's a huge amount of work that has to go in, because I have an obligation. When I was there and when I was a commander, is when you employ force and you send service members into harm's way, you need to have a plan, even if it's quick, but you need to make sure that they know what they're doing. They have to go back to the armory. They have to get instructions. They have to coordinate with local law enforcement. Where are they rolling into? In a crisis, you just don't like show up. You have to coordinate with the people that own the area. And so it's like you have to clear roads. You have to get buses. You have to get drivers. Drivers have to get briefed on the route that they're going to take. Oh, just follow the cops. That never works, because guess what? Somebody will get separated. So you have to go through this very, very appropriate planning sequence. And then guess what? You need to rehearse a little bit. You're like, folks, this is what we're going to do. This is what we expect. We're going to come in on the northeast side. Then, Jill, you remember, National Guard has to get deputized. They have to get sworn in as law enforcement. Oh, what? Yes. Bus pulls up. Sworn law enforcement officer gets on there. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. And they deputize them and then get off the bus. So the other thing too, when you're in a situation like this, you just don't want to like have 2 or 3 people show up, 10, 15 people. When the National Guard showed up, it needed to be, this situation has fundamentally changed. Time for you to get the heck out of here. So that's why I thought that General Walker and the Army were very appropriate in taking the time to to prepare the people for what they were doing. So when they showed up, it was game. The fundamental game has changed. So that's what happens. And that's why, I appreciate the question, because people are like, this isn't a video game. It's not a Netflix movie. Moving military forces and getting them ready and doing the right thing, because it would be unjust of me and our leaders to send them in without some sort of preparation. So that's what's happening. And then you got the fear, right? You got people like, what are we going into? You don't want them to go
fear
in.
Of the National Guard or fear?
Yeah, everybody's fearful. Everybody's like, what are we going into? Leaders have to make sure that their people know what they're going into, because the last thing you want to do is go in there and do something inappropriate. See, there's just so much stuff going on, and it's chaos when you're in the armory. People are running around and, hey, we need 15 more batons. And it's just really, so that's what's going on I assume. I wasn't there, but I think maybe if you ask somebody else, I'm pretty sure that's what's going on as they're getting ready to go down there. So 304, you give the word. I've seen that General Walker like, I didn't know what I was doing until you're going to have to ask him, because that's not the way I was raised, and that's not the way things typically are supposed to work.
So obviously you were at this point very involved in figuring out how to plan and execute what needed to be done. Did you have any? No,
I was not. No, that's not the way it works. I give the order to execute, and then it goes to Secretary of the Army McCarthy, who then goes to General Walker, who's the head of the DC National Guard, who then has his planning team throw a plan together and brief the people. And then it trickles all the way down through like 16 levels until the kid, well, probably not a kid, but the National Guard person who's going to be going out there knows exactly what they're doing. They know their rules of engagement. They know what they can do. They know what their purpose is, and they know their left and right limits.
Did you have any opportunity during that time to talk to the president or any other senior leaders?
Senior leaders, I talked to the vice president after. That's another one, like, the vice president ordered you to activate the National Guard. Talked to Pelosi, talked to all the Gang of Eight, talked to everybody after 304 when I had given the order to activate the entire DC National Guard and support local law enforcement and federal law enforcement in clearing the Capitol. So yeah, I talked to them all. Didn't talk to the president, didn't need to.
But you talked to the vice president when he was safe?
Yeah, he called.
He called, and what was his take on the events? Did he share with you?
What's going on? He was... Vice President Pence is extremely mission focused, and like, Mr. Secretary, what do you got? I'm like, hey, first off, I was like, Mr. Vice President, where are you? Because I guess I didn't know, because I asked him. He goes, I'm at the Capitol. Where do you think I am? I was like, oh, I'm sorry. He stayed there with his family. So yeah, I guess I didn't know that he stayed there until then. And I told him, hey, National Guard's mobilized. Going to come in and support law enforcement. It's on the way. Don't know when it's going to happen. It's going to take a while to prepare. Stand by. He goes, okay, got it. A really quick conversation. He's a little bit busy. I was too.
Yeah, so I guess, I really appreciate you going through this, because I think there is a lot of confusion about what happened that day. And I think specifically with what happened with President Trump, because it took him quite a long time to actually release a video and then condemn the mob that broke into the Capitol. So you mentioned that you didn't have any conversation with him, or that you didn't see the need to, but did you realize that maybe, his words could have impacted, when the mob would have retreated or any of that?
I mean, I had my upbringing is, you don't ask the boss for further authority or permission if you already have it. Do your job. So I had absolutely no reason to do that. What's going on there is spinning. I'm kind of tracking it. But at this point, you really have mission focus on, let's get this thing going, support the police that need support, and get ready for the next phase of this, which is going to be a lot.
Did you have any reaction? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jill.
Go ahead. I just wanted to clarify because I think I heard a different question. I think what Victor was getting at was that, eventually Trump did say, go home, although he said, go home, we love you, which is not exactly saying, get out of there and stop doing what you're doing. And I'm just wondering, you've already, I've heard you say on another outlet that without Trump's initial words, without saying go march and go and fight like hell, that this would not have happened. And I think what Victor's getting at is even after it happened, he could have stopped it. But we read that he was loving watching it and he didn't come out. And I'm just wondering what your knowledge is of that, if you have any knowledge.
I have none. I mean, I focused on what's going on. I was completely taken out of context, which I sound like Mike Flynn now. I apologize. And I sound so bitter and angry, and I shouldn't. I'm sorry, but this is obviously very concerned that everything's been so politicized. And, you brought it up at the beginning, like, hey, we're still not going to do a commission. I had the most lovely relationship with Governor Keene of New Jersey, who was on the September 11th commission with Lee Hamilton. And, I heard him on TV the other night where he said the true people that got the 9/11 commission through, and we remember this, everybody's like, oh, it was the best thing that ever happened. And, birds were singing and everybody was, hugging and singing Kumbaya. That's complete nonsense. The people that forced that commission to be established were the families. And he reminded people of that and reminded me. And I'm like, wow, very important. So now, Victor, you started, or maybe Jill, you started with like, we still don't have a commission. And so we're going to continue to flounder on with these issues. And so to answer your question, that was a roundabout way. I was probably, giving some talking point or something, although I don't have any talking points. So, your question had to do with, I even forgot what it was. So run it by me again.
This question or the first one?
Yeah, what was the last one?
Was just what you knew at the time, what you were thinking in terms of, could the president have...
Oh, okay. I know what I wanted to say. New information comes out literally every day about what happened on January 6th. So, when I look at video now, because a lot of that video wasn't available when you refer to the comments I made earlier, which, fine. And I stand by them. But here's what I was trying to make a point. And last time I was on testifying, I had a nice friend who kept texting me because with Zoom calls on the Hill now, you can actually get, my buddy's texting me as a political. He's like, hey man, they don't understand nuance. I understand what you're trying to say, but it's not working. It's like, oh man, I thought we were up here to like have a discussion and not just like get yelled at, but that's neither here nor, well, it is here and it is there. But the point I was trying to make was when I see more evidence there, it was clear that there were organized assault elements, cells of people that had shown up that day with one intent, and that was to cause violence. I don't know if there was some sort of larger conspiracy. The FBI will figure that out. So that's why I was trying to say, like, okay, President Trump did his thing on the ellipse and he said all the things that you brought up. Now, my point I'm trying to make is there were those people, and we see them with the helmets, and they're all stacked up going into the building and doing the bear spray. There were clearly organized elements. I don't think, my sense is that there was an organized conspiracy before that. Now, the collusion, I have no idea. That's probably why we need to have further, I know FBI is looking at it. So that was the point I was trying to make. It certainly wasn't helpful, but what I'm trying to say, not well, I recognize it, is it's clear to me that there were organized elements that were intending to do violence on the Capitol that day. And of course, when all those marchers came in, that gave them a huge amount of cover. So the question is, would they have assaulted the Capitol without the cover of the thousands of people that came up from the ellipse. I don't know.
I guess to me,
So, and you mentioned the 9/11 Commission, and what it resulted from the families, and yet the January 6th Commission, despite Officer Sicknick's family, the officer who was killed as a result of the violence that day, that didn't influence the decision of the Republicans today. It's a I know you don't want to do politics, but it is a different political environment than existed 9/11. We are now polarized in a way that does not allow for sensible decisions and compromise, and so.
So what are we going to do going forward? Is that a topic? Yeah. What do you guys think? I do all the talking. I'm tired of talking. What do you guys got?
Well, we have you here as our expert to talk about that. So, but I think Victor had some questions, and one of them at the end is asking about the future and what could be done to make the Defense Department more responsive, more appropriately responsive, or to avoid this ever happening again. Because I don't think any of us wants to see the Capitol defaced and disgraced in this way again.
Who's responsible? Who's responsible for Capitol Hill? That's the legislative branch, right? Now, isn't that a separate and co-equal branch of our government? And so you just don't get to show up on Capitol Hill. Like, leadership owns that hill. So, and my great counterpart, who was the acting attorney general, Jeff Rosen, brought that point up, and I thought it was very eloquent. It didn't resonate. It frankly didn't resonate with me at first, because you're kind of in the zone. You're like, thank God they didn't ask me a question. I can take a breath, and just watch the countdown meter as, get ready for the next question. But he brought that up very appropriately, that, the executive branch just doesn't roll forces in or roll you get invited on to Capitol Hill. And so I think there's some really important questions that haven't, I think, been adequately addressed yet, is the role of senior leadership on Capitol Hill that day. And my sense is there's a lot going on, and I don't know what it is, but I'd be really interested, because I think one of the questions is, DC Metropolitan Police did all hands on deck. Chief Conte, great, just wonderful, wonderful leader. In our pre-calls about coordination and synchronization for January 6th, he's like, this is all hands on deck. Everybody's showing up that day. I don't know if that happened on Capitol Hill. So I think there's some leadership questions. I have the utmost respect and regards. I got to be privileged to walk around and talk to some of those great police officers on Capitol Hill, and give them my thanks. But I don't know. I haven't seen that sort of insight or those sorts of questions being asked yet by what happened up there that day on their part.
Before Victor asks some of the forward-looking questions, in hindsight, is there anything that if you could redo the events of January 6th, that you would do differently?
This is going to sound like a cop-out, but there were 8,000 to 10,000 cops on duty that day. It is not in the nation's best interest to use your armed forces in domestic law enforcement except as a last resort, and when all other capabilities have been expended. And people will, what, don't you think that occurred? Yes, it did. And the fact of military operations is that, you don't snap your fingers. I highlight our best trained active duty forces that are on alert to deploy anywhere in the world have a requirement to be wheels up in 3 hours. The National Guard went from being out on checkpoints on one side of town and being helping clear the Capitol and supporting domestic law enforcement in, depends how you look at it, and we still don't have, but it was quicker than 3 hours. So that's kind of one of the fundamental things. And at the end of the day, it is not, that's what we have civilian law enforcement to do. And it's a slippery slope if you start using, military's the easy button. They'll do anything. They do what they're told. I mean, that's their greatest strength, right? But let's not turn it into their greatest weakness either. And this country was founded on an aversion to a standing military, and to use them domestically is extremely hazardous and extremely perilous to the republic. And so at the end of the day, I try to step back and look at the big picture. Oh, could we have, done something this way or that way? Obviously, there's always things that you can do. And I was a special operator, Green Beret in my first career, and we're the most hypercritical people in the world. And our principle is always to improve our performance. So absolutely there are things, but when you step it back and you look at the Secretary of Defense level and you look at the Constitution and you look at the role of the armed forces and the military, I really am, I stand by it. And I think, frankly, when we get through this period of this antagonism and this hyper-partisanship, I think, historians are going to go like, yeah, that's the correct role of the military. And at the end of the day, you answer to elected officials. Mayor Bowser had a very specific request. Let's remember, go ahead, let's do a mind game, a thought experiment. If I would have put troops up on Capitol Hill before January 6th, it would have been a constitutional crisis, probably biggest we've had since Watergate. I'm guessing, Jill, you live that one. But that was my thought, and I knew that. And it's kind of funny now how people that were so anti-military and so concerned are the ones that are very adamant that somehow their military failed them. They don't blame the military; they blame me. I'll own it all day long. Good managers, good leaders accept responsibility for everything that good that happens or everything that bad that happens. But at the end of the day, I'm very comfortable with the decisions that I made that day in support of the Constitution.
On that day, or even going forward to since January 20th, have you been in touch with other members of the cabinet? And during that time, first of all, during that time period between January 6th and January 20th, was there any cabinet meetings or not a meeting with the president, but did cabinet members speak to each other and express any concern about the events of that day?
I think I can only speak for myself, but you have to compartment these things, and you're seeing this horrendous event occur, but you still have a job to do. So I think most of us were like, we'll work through this after we leave government and have a little bit of time. But right now we have an obligation to look at the next challenge. And that was, going forward, there were still some significant international threats that were out there. So there was still a lot going on. And so I don't think there was, I think there was a sense of like, wow, no, there was more than a sense. It was like, that was a really bad day for our country. I don't think anybody said, oh, whatever. No, everybody recognized, not everyone, the people that I talked to, the cabinet officials and others, were very disturbed and disappointed and concerned.
Well, and you mentioned you were focused on January 20th, the actual inauguration. And I'm wondering, because there was so much going on in terms of public commentary about the president and what he had caused and the belief that he had been the direct cause of this terrible thing, whether there was ever any discussion among you in the cabinet of the 25th Amendment.
No.
Okay.
I just want to quickly just touch on the period between January 6th and January 20th. What were your main goals between that period? Obviously, it turned out, the inauguration was very smooth, but I guess, what were your goals between that period and I guess your reaction to a lot of the increased presence of the National Guard at the Capitol complex?
First and foremost was to deter the enemies of our country that meant us ill and intended to harm us. That was the fundamental focus. When you put 26,000 National Guardsmen, National Guards people into District of Columbia, I was quite confident that the security situation had been resolved, and I was not at all concerned that there was going to be a recurrence of the activities that happened on January 6th.
Before we had this conversation. We did a little bit research about your time at George Washington University, and we found out that you studied history and that you won an award for the highest GPA in the history department. And so you're obviously well versed with history and everything that's going on in our country right now. And I'm wondering, with the amount of polarization we have right now, what do you think is the best way to deal with January 6th? And I guess, how much damage do you think the insurrection did to the legitimacy of democracy on the global stage?
Thanks for bringing that up, because all my buddies, the only reason I got that award is my two roommates graduated a semester earlier who were a billion times smarter than I is. And so I was like the last guy standing. There were probably only 3 people in the history department.
Hey, you still have that honor to wear. You know, it's still a great badge. I must have put that in a resin. I wonder where that came from. Hilarious. I won it. I'll take $200. I need to pay back GW for that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to pay them back. You know, I think it was serious, and it was, it's not unprecedented by the Capitol. I mean, the Capitol's been bombed a couple times. I mean, let's, you know, I, as a person who is an amateur historian, I would just love if we could just like dial it down and take a breath. And I get it from my family. Like, these are the worst times. The country's coming undone. I'm like, we fought a civil war where almost 500,000 American citizens died fighting each other. So let's go ahead and let's just talk a little differently about this. And I think democracy is ready for a reset. I think remember the progressive era with TR and everybody? Took a long time. Those ideas that led to that recreation of our democracy, and, you know, we can go back to Jackson, we can go to FDR, those ideas were planted, 20, 30 years before, healthy, Food and Drug Administration, minimum wage, all the things that are known. And then when FDR with the New Deal coalition, I mean, so I think I'm hopeful. And you guys had Lawrence Lessig on there. I'd like to meet him, by the way, because I read all of his stuff, and I just, he's thought through this, and I think he has a great plan of action. So those are the kind of things, but I'm just going to be brutally honest with you. And we have got to break the professional political class. And I firmly believe that we have to go to term limits, that we have created. This is what I learned in this last experience, is our current political order is concerned about 3 things: gaining power, maintaining power, or increasing power. And there's absolutely it's not necessary for them to be compromised, because they have to go to both extremes. I think it's directly related to the current situation. We have a breed of professional politicians. I think we have to go back, and everybody's like, that would never happen. Victor, you can yell at me. Chris, that would never happen. That means they'd have to vote themselves out of office. Well, I actually still have a pretty fervent belief in the goodness of American citizenry. And we like to say, oh, we're all a bunch of uneducated people that don't know anything anymore. I actually find that's why I love coming out to the Midwest, and I love going to Iowa and listening to people and asking questions, and all the craziness that happens in DC that I get yelled at by my wife and children about, Dad, or honey, you gotta fight back. And you go out there and people are really, this sounds like a political ad. It's not. People are really concerned about this country, taking care of their family in the future. So that's kind of where I am. And it was a horrible day. It was a horrible event. And we're in this really, really difficult political situation. But hey, we hold the future in our hands. And, you guys aren't paying me, but I'm going to say it. You guys having shows like this where we can have these conversations and hopefully help educate a couple people. I'm absolutely surprised, because I had a person I work with came in and it's like, hey, my aunt called. She was on the West Coast, very educated woman. She said, do you know this Chris Miller? He's going to overthrow the country. Can you believe this? Extremely well educated, extremely knowledgeable about current affairs and the political system. And my friend goes, he's three doors down. Do you want me to go down there and ask him? I don't think that's going to happen. But what that resonated with me was the state that we are in right now, where people are
going to take everything to such an extreme and not have a conversation about it. And that's just why I love what you guys are doing. And I thank you for having me on. And I hope I didn't let you down. But this is an emotional issue. And I'm sure I came across as shrill and crass and some sort of like demonic figure, some sort of like, Death Eater or something. But hey, it is what it is. But it would be nice if people recognize that, you know what, we're all in this together. Let's give it a whirl. And so I'm optimistic, man, and maybe that I'm a cup half full person. You can yell at me and call me an idiot, and everybody will, but I'm not giving up. I think we got a good future ahead of us, but we really have to get our act together, and we need to really be serious about this.
I totally agree with you. I think we
sound like a complete paid political announcement. I know, Victor. You're like, oh man,
no. I was just saying, I
don't have any notes in front of me.
I totally agree with you, and I think in this hyper-partisan world, it would be so nice to go back to a time when we did debate ideas instead of, throw everyone into the extreme edges. And I'm wondering, as someone who does engage in these conversations with whom people, you disagree, what advice do you have for young people in this moment and in this hyper-partisan world?
Thank you, because I do have a couple themes I try to bring up. And I'm like, who's going to serve right now? I mean, there is such an intrinsic value in public service. And I'm like, if you're going to get annihilated, you're going to get publicly ridiculed, you're going to get threatened, and your family is going to be attacked. The only people that are going to serve are narcissists or borderline doggone sociopaths. I mean, that's what we're establishing because who else is going to volunteer to do this? And that really worries the heck out of me. And that's why we've got to appreciate the people that are willing to go into the arena. And I got all sorts of thoughts on that really are very dark and concerning when you really think about it. Is this actually how the system they are trying to perpetuate itself? Like, we want people like us that are narcissistic, borderline sociopaths that only care about power. Are we self-selecting that? Because I got to tell you, my dad was a career civil servant. He was a cop, and he was like, there's nobility in public service. And that really resonated with me. And maybe I'm just a dinosaur, but I still firmly believe that. And I tell that to my children and they roll their eyes. But I just really think that we've got to reestablish. One of the crazy ideas, and it's been out there for a while now. And Victor, I talked to a lot of people from your generation and nobody's shut me down yet. I'm like, I think we should have some universal service. And it's just not military. You can go work in environmental stuff. You can go work in healthcare. You can go work in education. Do 18 months, and to I call it reestablish this bonds of goodness of our country. And you don't have to do the military. If you want to do the military, fine. If you want to do a little mini Peace Corps thing, that's fine. I really think that we really need. And all right, so dude, I kind of costed this out. A Ford aircraft carrier, 4-class aircraft carrier, costs $14 billion a year. We're buying 2 of them. Let's just buy one. And let's go ahead. It sounds cliche and trite. And let's take 14 billion will cover an entire program to, expand AmeriCorps or some other thing. So that's kind of where I am. I think we've got to reestablish the bonds of connectivity with our goodness.
I guess maybe the last question is, you're out of public service now. Would you ever go back into public service in the future if you were to be asked?
My wife would, my marriage is more important to me, and I don't think we could go through that again. It was absolutely eviscerating. And, to be my talk about like and I did, it was great. I was like, there's family, it's about public service. This is what we do. And I quieted him down for about 20 seconds. But I don't think I can do that one again. And I would never say never, but I really hope to have more of an impact on our national security discussions and discussions like this from the outside and play a role there. But never say never, because at the end of the day, this is what I do. I'm a public servant, and if somebody called, I can't imagine anybody's going to call. So it's pretty easy for me to say, yeah, I'd be happy to do it. But we'd have a family meeting on that one, and I think I would be overwhelmingly outvoted.
So thank you so much. This has been, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. We have. We got off to a little rocky start, but I think it turned out to be a good conversation. And it might be interesting to have you back to talk about national public service, because I think it's an idea whose time may have come. And there's a lawsuit now that is challenging the mail-only draft, so that at least that might be something. I mean, I hope we never go back to needing a draft, but if there is,
Same.
I certainly am in favor of abolishing the mail-only. But thank you very
Thank you
much
so
for
much.
being here. And
Thanks for what you guys are doing. Sorry I got off a little angry, but I'm glad that we had a conversation, and that's what you guys promised when you asked me to do this. And I appreciate what you're doing, and let's keep at it. And if there's some way I can help in the future, I'd love to.
Thank you so much.
thank you very much.